Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the place dedicated to making you well-informed quickly by taking vast libraries of information and distilling them down into the nuggets you need to know.
Today, we are traveling deep into the foundations of East Asian thought.
All the way back to, well, probably the most dangerous era of ancient China, the Warring States period, we're going to explore a man whose philosophical blueprint was so revolutionary, it essentially codified the right to overthrow a tyrannical government. We're talking centuries before the Western Enlightenment.
We're focusing on Mencius, or Meng Ke. He's the philosopher whose shadow looms almost as large as Confucius himself, which is why he earned the title of the Second Sage.
And the dates are roughly, 371 to 289 BC?
That's about right, yeah. And you really have to get the context here. I mean, this was not a time of peaceful contemplation. This was a period of just existential chaos. Philosophical ideas were literally military and political weapons.
Wrong advice could get you killed.
Absolutely, life or death stakes.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our sources document this remarkable 40-year quest he went on. He moved from state to state, and it sounds like it was often frustrating trying to convince these ruthless regional kings to adopt policies based on, well, benevolence rather than just brute force.
And he mostly failed. He failed to achieve the political reform he wanted in his lifetime, but his arguments survived.
Yeah.
And they are incredibly potent.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to give you a really comprehensive understanding of Mencius's legacy.
And we're going to zero in on three central concepts. First, his profoundly optimistic doctrine that human nature is fundamentally good, that it just needs cultivation.
Right. And second, this astonishing political philosophy, the idea that a populace has the moral, heaven-sanctioned right to execute a harsh ruler.
Which is just a radical idea for the time. And third, we'll get into the legendary stories about his mother, because they illustrate so perfectly how essential environment and diligence are to forming your character.
We've got material spanning his life, the nuanced details of his ethics. I'm really interested in the famous Four Beginnings and his surprisingly detailed, almost modern principles for economics and fair taxation.
And we have to keep that historical backdrop in mind. The Warring States period was really dominated by this idea of legalism.
Which is all about strict law, punishment, centralized, unquestioning power.
Exactly. And Mencius stood diametrically opposed to that. He offered a blueprint for a society based on ren, or benevolence, built from the bottom up, not the top down.
His idealism, it seems almost foolish considering the era he was in.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But his commitment to the moral core of humanity is precisely what makes his work so enduring. He argued that if a ruler governs with genuine humanity and righteousness, they gain a moral strength that military might can never replicate.
And that, he claimed, would make the state basically invincible.
That was the argument.
Fascinating. All right, let's jump in. Let's start with the life story of Meng Ke and the incredible influence of his formative years.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. Mencius was born Meng Ke in the state of Zhu. That's now modern Zhucheng in Shandong province. And what's really critical here is that he wasn't a direct student of Confucius.
No, he wasn't. The historical accounts place him as a fourth-generation disciple.
So what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, it means he didn't just inherit the Confucian framework as, a set of received wisdom. He was tasked with developing it, defending it, and defending it against some pretty serious ideological attacks that were mounting at the time.
His career path seems to really reflect that intellectual dynamism of the era. He wasn't some hermit philosopher writing scrolls in a cave.
Not at all. He was a professional academic. He served as a high-ranking scholar and official at the renowned Xunzi Academy in the state of Qi. That was from roughly 319 to 312 BC, and that period was absolutely essential for his intellectual growth.
We can't just gloss over the Xunzi Academy. This wasn't just some quiet university campus, was it? What made it so important in the intellectual landscape?
Think of it as maybe the world's first state-sponsored high-stakes think tank.
Okay.
The rulers of Qi gathered the brightest minds from all across the fragmented states. You had Confucians, Taoists, legalists, Mohists, all of them. And the state gave them stipends to debate and formulate governing policies.
So Mencius wasn't just teaching there. He was actively defending his worldview.
Every single day, he was defending this optimistic Confucian worldview against these harsh, pragmatic critics, especially the rising legalists, who believed only strict law and punishment could actually govern men.
So his very argumentative style, which we'll get to when we talk about his book, that was forged in this crucible of intense critical debate.
Precisely. His experience there gave him a huge amount of confidence and skill in protracted argument. But, despite his eloquence and decades of travel, offering counsel to all these different states, the political reality of the Warring States period was just too entrenched in violent, immediate ambition.
And the records show he ultimately retired from public life.
He was disappointed, right? Disappointed at his failure to actually bring about the profound political changes he was pushing for.
It was a failure of his political career, yes. But it was a huge win for philosophy.
How so?
Because that disappointment and his subsequent retirement, that's what led him to consolidate his decades of dialogues and debates into the definitive text we have today.
Which brings us to the book itself, also titled The Mencius. We mentioned it was canonized as a Confucian classic, but structurally, it's really different from the other foundational texts.
Oh, it's a crucial distinction. If you read Confucius's Analects, they're essentially collections of short, sometimes cryptic, often self-contained sayings, aphorisms collected by his students.
Right.
The Mencius is fundamentally different. It's made up of long, detailed, and highly reasoned dialogues. You can actually see him systematically engaging in dialectic, responding to criticisms, and building these complex, tiered arguments with rulers and rivals who are challenging his core principles. So it gives you a much clearer window into the mechanics of his thinking.
A much clearer window, yes.
And now for the character who is, well, arguably as central to his legacy as his philosophy, his mother, Meng Mu.
Meng Mu is not just a footnote. She is truly an essential figure in Chinese cultural history. I mean, she is held up as the gold standard of motherhood and pedagogical excellence. The records show 4 specific stories about her were preserved in Lu Jiang's biographies of exemplary women, which just cemented her status.
And in a way, she's the living proof of Mencius's later philosophical assertion that your environment dictates your moral character.
She is the walking embodiment of that principle.
All right, let's start with the most famous story, the idiom, the Chanyu, that's still used constantly today, the 3 moves, or Meng Meng Sangqun. This really gets at that connection between environment and character.
It's a pedagogical masterpiece. So the story goes, the family first lived near a cemetery, and as a young boy, Mencius naturally started imitating what he saw every day.
So he was mimicking the rituals of burial, the formal solemnity, the mourning.
Exactly. And while, observing rites is a very Confucian thing to do, she judged that this environment was too focused on death and formal ritual, rather than on proactive learning and contribution to society.
So move number 1, they relocate. Where did she try next?
She moved them near a market. And again, Mencius absorbed his environment. He started imitating the loud, transactional, sometimes aggressive behavior of the merchants. He was focused on profit and calculation.
And Meng Mu saw this and realized this environment was just emphasizing material gain and competition, which was also unsuitable for cultivating the humane qualities she wanted in her son.
Precisely. Which leads to the definitive third and final move.
They moved next to a school.
They moved next to a school. And here, the boy began imitating the students, studying, practicing proper conduct, and engaging with books. And only then did Meng Mu declare the environment suitable and decide to stay put.
The story is so impactful because it just drives home the point that character isn't fixed. It's shaped by what surrounds you, and it requires this extraordinary parental effort to curate that environment.
It does. And Meng Meng Kanquan is now the universal cultural shorthand in Chinese for emphasizing the importance of a child's environment.
Okay, so that addresses environment. But the second great story highlights the need for diligence, which would become just as central to Mencius's doctrine of cultivation. That's cutting the weaving, or Meng Mu Duanzi.
Yes. So this anecdote happened when Mencius was a bit older, a student perhaps, and he showed a lapse in his commitment. Maybe he was truant, or just wasn't dedicating himself fully to his studies.
And instead of just lecturing him,
she performed this stunning symbolic act. She was diligently weaving a piece of cloth, which was a crucial source of income for the family, and she took her scissors and just cut the finished material right in front of him.
Wow, that is a very dramatic, nonverbal lesson. What was the exact message she was trying to get across by destroying her own work?
The intention was to viscerally demonstrate the value of unceasing effort and commitment. She equated stopping the pursuit of knowledge midway to cutting the cloth.
So in both cases, the entire effort is ruined. You're left with nothing but wasted time and potential.
Exactly. She showed him that intermittent effort yields no lasting fruit. This visual shock apparently spurred Mencius toward the intense, diligent study that was required of a sage. He internalized the message that true moral or intellectual cultivation is a continuous process that you You can't abandon.
And these lessons weren't just for him as a child. The third anecdote, the divorce-interrupted story, is fantastic because it shows that even as an adult, the future second sage was still getting these sharp ethical instructions from his mother.
And this one is wonderfully ironic. So Mencius returns home one day and finds his wife, in his estimation, not sitting properly.
What does that even mean? She was just too relaxed or something.
It could be anything. Maybe she wasn't adhering to his specific formal posture. But Mencius, being so deeply invested in propriety, was so offended by this perceived breach of ritual etiquette that he intended to divorce her immediately.
On the spot. And his mother, the expert in rights, steps in.
She does, and she completely turns the tables on him. Meng Mu intervened, and she cited the Book of Rights,
Okay.
which specifies that a person must loudly announce their presence before entering a private room. This rule isn't just some petty formality. It ensures the person inside has time to compose themselves, to make preparations. It guarantees mutual respect.
So because Mencius failed to announce himself, he was the one who actually violated the fundamental right of respect and propriety.
Exactly. And this is the core philosophical insight. Meng Mu taught him that rights aren't about catching others in minor missteps or enforcing rigid external conformity. They're fundamentally about self-awareness. They're about ensuring your own actions facilitate respect for other people.
He failed to examine his own conduct before passing this really harsh judgment on his wife.
And the records note he immediately admitted his fault, which, it showcases his capacity for humility and, crucially, his philosophical alignment with this idea that education is about lifelong self-correction.
Section 1 gives us that foundation: environment and rigorous self-discipline. And this leads us perfectly into Mencius's core philosophical principle, which was controversial in his own time and I think remains so today: his doctrine of innate goodness.
This is his primary principle, that human nature is naturally righteous and humane, or Ren.
This is the defining feature of mentioned Confucianism, right?
Yeah.
And the implications are just tectonic. If human nature is intrinsically good, then the failure of society, all the chaos of the warring states, you can't blame that on the inherent evil of the populace.
We can't.
So, if we are born good, where does evil come from?
Mencius explicitly concluded that bad moral character and social failure arise from the influence of society, from the failure of rulers to provide a humane environment, and from the neglect of our own innate moral impulses. It's an incredibly optimistic, but also a very demanding perspective.
And this position put him in direct intellectual combat with the other great Confucian mind of his era, Xunzi. Let's just clarify that contrast because it's really essential context.
Xunzi held the mirror opposite view. He believed that human nature is innately evil, that it's driven by selfish desires and required strict external social controls laws, rituals, training, all enforced by a powerful state to prevent chaos.
Whereas Mencius offered a fundamentally different prescription. He argued that if you are born good, you don't need control. You need cultivation. You need favorable conditions.
Exactly. And the path to moral growth, for him, is defined not by external instruction, but by internal discovery. He called it finding the lost mind.
He says, he who exerts his mind to the utmost knows his nature. That sounds like some pretty intensive self-effort.
It requires deep, internal, focused effort to cut through all the societal grime that has obscured that original innate goodness. And this is why a lot of scholars argue that Mencius successfully synthesized elements of Taoist thought into Confucianism.
Okay, how does that fusion work exactly?
Well, Taoism celebrates this kind of effortless, natural, flowing existence. Mencius validates the natural. Your nature is good. It's like flowing water. But then he imposes the Confucian requirement for effort.
The lesson from his mother.
The lesson from his mother. You must actively and diligently work to maintain the environment and the path. Otherwise, that natural goodness will be corrupted by social influence. It's not enough to be good. You have to work at being good.
And to prove this innate goodness wasn't just some theoretical speculation, he introduced a thought experiment. It's designed to resonate immediately with anyone. The powerful example of a witness seeing a child falling down a well.
It's a perfect scenario to isolate pure moral instinct. Imagine you're walking by and you see an infant crawling toward the edge of an abandoned well. Mencius argues that your reaction would be immediate. It would be alarm and distress. You'd move to save the child without any rational calculation.
And the power of the argument comes from him systematically eliminating every possible self-interested reason for you to intervene.
Absolutely. He stresses that you wouldn't feel alarmed because you want to gain friendship with the child's parents, or because you're seeking praise from your neighbors and community, or even because you fear a bad reputation if you didn't act.
So it's none of those things. It's just a purely selfless, instinctual, moral alarm.
That immediate distress, he says, is the seed or the sprout of all human morality.
And he formalizes these moral seeds into what he calls the four beginnings, drawing this analogy to the four limbs every healthy human is born with. They are innate capacities that just have to be nurtured.
Right.
Okay, so let's walk through the transformation from the seed to the virtue.
First, you have that core reaction we just discussed, the feeling of commiseration, that spontaneous empathy you feel when you witness suffering. That, he says, is the beginning, the sprout of humanity, Ren. And Ren isn't just kindness, it's a really comprehensive, compassionate humaneness.
So that instinctive alarm is the raw material, and then cultivation turns that raw material into the stable virtue of Ren.
Exactly. You start with the instinct, but daily effort, self-reflection, and a good environment transform it into a robust, consistent, and rational virtue.
Okay, what's the second sprout? This one centers on accountability, doesn't it?
Yes, the feeling of shame and dislike. So shame over your own faults, and a natural aversion or dislike of what is unrighteous in others. This feeling is the beginning of righteousness, Yi. This is our capacity for self-correction and for standing up for moral principles.
And the third sprout links directly back to those practical lessons he learned from his mother about proper conduct.
That's the feeling of difference and compliance. Knowing your place in a social structure, understanding mutual respect, and adhering to appropriate behavior. This feeling is the beginning of propriety, and just as Meng Mu taught him, Li is about ensuring your actions promote social harmony and respect, not just following some arbitrary rules.
And the fourth, which is what allows us to discern and apply the other three.
That is the feeling of right or wrong, the innate ability to judge moral situations and distinguish between good and bad. This is the beginning of wisdom, Xunzi. Mencius posits that you are born with the ability to discern morality. You just need to train that instinct.
But the sprouts can be choked, just like any plant. What happens if this innate goodness is neglected?
Mencius delivers a very powerful warning about self-destruction here. He states that men possess these four beginnings, and saying that they cannot develop them is to destroy themselves.
So by failing to cultivate this innate capacity for goodness, we aren't just becoming passively neutral. We're actively contributing to our own moral ruin.
It's a willful rejection of our true nature. That's how he sees it.
Which brings us back to the environment. I mean, if moral rightness is internal, why did his mother's 3 moves matter so much?
Because cultivation is the bridge between instinct and virtue. If you plant a seed in concrete, it won't grow. It's the same idea. If the environment, the society, the ruler, the community is corrupt or predatory or focused purely on profit, it just overwhelms the individual will. It becomes so much harder to find the lost mind when society is actively pushing you toward material self-interest.
So Mencius requires active daily effort to nurture that innate goodness, and the environment has to support that effort.
They work hand in hand.
On a related note, Mencius was also really concerned with forces beyond our individual control, which led him to distinguish very sharply between destiny and fate.
In classical Chinese philosophy, these terms often get blurred, but Mencius drew a vital line. He accepted the concept of destiny, believing it defined a person's role or path in life, but he insisted it was a path that was both unforeseen and constructive.
And how did he define fate, which he rejected?
Fate, or at least the common interpretation of divine protection, suggests a passive attitude. The idea that heaven will protect a person regardless of their conduct or their effort, and Mencius absolutely rejected this. Destiny requires active participation and wisdom. You can't just expect divine intervention if you behave foolishly.
That makes his famous warning a piece of intensely practical moral advice. One who understands destiny will not stand beneath a tottering wall.
That's the perfect analogy for the difference, isn't it? If you believe in fate, you stand beneath the wall and just assume heaven will prevent it from collapsing on you, regardless of the obvious physical danger. But if you understand destiny, you recognize that constructive paths require self-preservation guided by wisdom, not passive hope. Destiny is the path that opens up when you act righteously and wisely.
And that path needs maintenance, he warned. Unused pathways are covered with weeds. Effort is mandatory.
Always.
This emphasis on active maintenance, on exertion, it extends directly into his philosophy of learning. He was deeply critical of passive rote education.
Oh, absolutely. For Mencius, true education had to awaken those innate abilities, the four beginnings, and strengthen the mind's ability to discern right from wrong. He demanded active interrogation of the material, Students had to debate facts against their own experience and check for internal consistency within the historical records they were studying.
And this all culminates in his powerful and still so relevant warning against dogma, a quote that really speaks directly to any of us navigating information overload today.
The quote is iconic. One who believes all in the book of documents would be better off without the book.
That is an astounding claim coming from a foundational Confucian scholar.
It's incredible. He's saying that if you treat a venerable text as an unquestionable dogma, accepting it blindly without critical thought, without comparing it to your moral experience or checking its internal logic, then the text itself becomes a hindrance to wisdom.
True knowledge isn't just accumulation, it's deep critical engagement.
That's the core of his educational philosophy.
Okay, so if the cultivation of our inner good nature is Mencius's moral achievement, his political theory is his revolutionary achievement, we need to transition now to the most radical part of his thought, the justification for overthrowing a ruler.
This political philosophy really hinges on his idea of the primacy of the citizen. Unlike so many thinkers before him who treated the ruler as, quasi-divine, Mencius fundamentally redefined the proper hierarchy of the state, and he placed the common people, the citizens, at the very top in terms of moral legitimacy.
So the ruler is functionally demoted from this divine figure to, what, a steward, an employee of the state's resources and people.
Precisely. A steward. The ruler is subordinate to the masses and to the resources of society. A ruler has to continually justify their position by acting benevolently, ren, and righteously, ye.
And if the ruler ignores the people's welfare, rules harshly, or fails to provide that stable, nourishing environment required for moral cultivation, then that ruler forfeits his status.
He does. And this is the intellectual leap, the justification for regicide. Mencius established the philosophical grounds for subjects to overthrow or even kill a tyrant.
Which would have been truly inflammatory in the Warring States period, where rulers demanded absolute obedience.
He was an ideological stick of dynamite. He made this astonishing justification clearest when he was discussing the historical overthrow of the deeply wicked King Xu of Shang. This was an act that had traditionally been difficult to justify for subsequent dynastic legitimacy.
Let's focus on the wording here, because it's a brilliant linguistic maneuver that provides cover for revolution. Mencius said, "I have merely heard of killing a villain Xu, but I have not heard of murdering him as the ruler."
This is philosophical surgery on the concept of kingship.
It really is.
What Mencius is arguing is that by becoming cruel, greedy, and unrighteous, King Xu had already, morally and legitimately, ceased to be a true ruler in the eyes of heaven and the people. He was a functionally deposed leader long before the actual overthrow.
So eliminating him wasn't an act of sacrilege or murder against an anointed king. It was just an act of justice against a common criminal, a villain.
That's the argument. The implication for us is profound. The ruler's authority, the mandate of heaven, is entirely conditional. It is instantaneously withdrawn the moment the ruler ceases to be humane and righteous toward the people. The people's welfare is the ultimate measure of the ruler's legitimacy.
It is the ultimate blueprint for political accountability, placing the needs of the governed above the inherent power of the governor. And this system dictates who Mencius thought was worthy of leadership: the superior men.
Right, the superior men who distinguish themselves from the common or inferior men by their focus. The superior men focus only on righteousness, not personal gain. But, and this is a crucial linkage, our sources note that upholding this high morality requires an economic precondition: permanent property.
Okay, what does that mean?
Mencius understood that if the people are constantly struggling for bare survival, if they lack permanent property or economic stability, it becomes impossibly difficult for them to cultivate the four beginnings. Hunger and fear breed selfish behavior.
So righteous governance is required not just to prevent suffering, but to create the very environment where morality can actually flourish in the first place.
Exactly. Which transitions us smoothly into the economics of Mencius. He wasn't just a moralist. He had a very specific, detailed vision for running the state's finances.
And it starts with a pretty radical idea for the time.
It does. He provides much of the foundational Confucian perspective on economics, and he advocates for a dramatically hands-off approach regarding the marketplace. His philosophy held that the state should interfere as little as possible.
Why that hands-off approach, especially during a time of chaos? Wouldn't that leave people vulnerable to unscrupulous merchants, which seems to contradict his focus on benevolence?
That's a key challenge to his system, and he addressed it by defining the state's dual role. The hands-off approach was intended to prevent the state itself from creating stifling monopolies.
Okay.
He believed that people, being inherently good and rational, could be trusted to engage in beneficial exchange. However, he also emphasized the state's concurrent responsibility to actively protect against future monopolies or price gouging by private actors.
So it's an interventionist non-intervention.
You could put it that way, yes.
And what about his specific principles for taxation? They seem highly progressive.
They are. He was a champion of free trade and low tax rates. And crucially, he argued emphatically against taxing imports.
What was his reasoning there?
It was pragmatic and benevolent. The purpose of the market is to exchange for what you lack. So taxing a merchant who's bringing in salt or grain only results in those goods being more expensive for the villagers who desperately need them. Taxing trade ultimately taxes the poor.
So if they weren't taxing trade, how did the state collect essential revenue?
Mencius stipulated that taxes on property were acceptable, and they should be the only means for collection. And he stressed that these taxes should only be for supplemental funds.
Which indicates he expected the core functions of government to be managed leanly, through efficient stewardship rather than just massive revenue collection.
That's the idea. And the mechanism he proposed for property tax was surprisingly sophisticated for the time. It was progressive.
Right.
His system ensured that families who held larger, more fertile pieces of land paid a proportionately higher amount than families with smaller, less productive uniform land allotments. This meant the wealthy contributed more to the state's maintenance, reflecting his core belief that stability for the masses was paramount.
It's a very early application of progressive fiscal policy, and it's rooted in moral benevolence.
It is. And finally, his principles extended to resource management, demonstrating a kind of long-term ecological thinking. He even reframed scarcity as potential abundance if you were disciplined enough.
How so?
He argued that natural resources, forests, fisheries, fields, must be used according to their natural cycles of growth and replenishment. You shouldn't, for instance, cut down trees when they're naturally growing or fish during spawning season.
So you avoid short-term gains that would cripple future abundance.
Exactly. His principle was clear. Posterity has priority over profit. A truly superior man, focused on righteousness, must govern the state in a way that benefits future generations, ensuring the environment remains capable of sustaining the moral cultivation of the people.
So Mencius's life ended in disappointment. He never saw his benevolent political system implemented. But how did his political and moral philosophy manage to survive the centuries and become so central to Chinese thought?
His survival and ultimate dominance are really a testament to the power of his intellectual rigor. His interpretation of Confucianism, particularly that doctrine of innate goodness, has generally been considered the orthodox version by subsequent Chinese philosophers, especially when you compare it to the legalists or even to Xunzi.
The claim is often made that he was more influential than Confucius had been during Confucius's own lifetime. How did his influence become so cemented?
It was primarily through the rise of Neo-Confucianism during the Song dynasty. There was a great Neo-Confucian synthesizer, Xu, who lived from 1130 to 1200, and he made a really critical move.
What did he do?
He grouped Mencius's text, the Mencius, with three other key texts, the Analects, Great Learning, and Doctrine of the Mean to form the four books.
And the four books then became required reading for the Chinese civil service exams for centuries.
They became the absolute core foundation of orthodox Neo-Confucian thought. So if you wanted to serve the state, you had to internalize Mencius's arguments on the conditional nature of the mandate of heaven and the goodness of human nature. His longer argumentative dialogue style became central to the education and administration of the Chinese Empire.
It's interesting how that massive influence in the East contrasts with his really slow introduction to the West. Our sources detail a specific linguistic hiccup that caused this early neglect.
It's an unfortunate piece of historical irony. The early Jesuit missionaries, who were the first to translate the Confucian canon, they initially neglected the Mencius.
And this was partly because of a translation error.
It was. They misinterpreted a specific word, and it led them to believe that Mencius condemned celibacy as unfilial.
Which for Jesuit translators would have been a massive philosophical red flag.
Exactly. It made him seem ideologically incompatible with their own religious doctrine. Subsequent scholarship clarified that the mistranslation related more to general social conduct and fulfilling one's designated family role, not to condemning celibacy as a life choice, but that initial error really hampered his reception in Europe.
But his work did eventually break through.
It did. Scholars like François Noël eventually recognized Mencius's work as the natural and powerful development of Confucius's original philosophy. Noël published the first full Latin edition of the Mencius in 1711 in Prague, and that gradually introduced his political and moral thought to a wider Western intellectual sphere.
And his influence isn't just historical. We see active institutions dedicated to his philosophy today.
His legacy continues to grow. It remains globally relevant, which just demonstrates the power of these ancient ideas. The first modern Mencius Institute, which is dedicated to research and education in his specific branch of Confucianism, was established in Xunzi, China in 2008.
And confirming his global intellectual reach, the first Mencius Institute outside of China was established in Malaysia in 2016.
That's right. It really underscores that the philosophical principles, the intrinsic goodness of humanity, the requirement for active cultivation, and the demand for benevolent, accountable leadership are still being studied and applied in contemporary ethical and political discussions all over the world.
This deep dive has shown us that Mencius was really a man of radical optimism in an age of profound pessimism. We navigated that crucial biographical context from the three strategic moves of his mother and the sharp lesson about cutting the weaving.
Linking environment and diligence directly to his eventual philosophy.
Then we explored the absolute core of his ethical framework, the doctrine of innate goodness proven by the four beginnings.
Right, illustrating how an instinct like commiseration, which we saw in the Child and the Well-Thought experiment, must be actively cultivated to become the virtue of humanity, or Ren.
And we finished with his revolutionary political blueprint, which gave subjects the moral authority to depose a tyrant, framing regicide not as murder, but as an act of justice against a common criminal.
And that was coupled with his sophisticated vision for a decentralized, benevolent economy, featuring free trade and progressive property taxation.
Mencius stands as such a compelling figure because he refuses to accept external control as the only solution.
He really does. He synthesized that Taoist idea of a natural path toward goodness and then married it to the Confucian requirement for individual active effort. His message is a powerful call to agency. You were born good, but you must work diligently within the right environment to maintain and expand that goodness.
So, we leave you with this final provocative thought, drawn directly from the text of the Mencius. One who understands destiny will not stand beneath a tottering wall. If destiny is the path that is unforeseen and constructive, and if bad environments tend to corrupt the human will, what tottering walls, be they economic, political, or social structures in our modern society, are we currently standing beneath, believing we are passively protected? And what active, unforeseen, and constructive path should a superior person actively cultivate today to truly exert their mind to the utmost? That's your takeaway thought to explore.